All right, today we're going to talk about a true baseball legend, but also one of the game's most complicated figures, Ty Cobb. We're going to get right into the stats and the stories that made him who he was. So let's just start with one single number, .366. That was Ty Cobb's career batting average. It is the highest in the history of Major League Baseball. And to give you some perspective, nobody in the modern era has even sniffed that. It's one of those records in sports that you just look at and think, how is that even possible? Just a monument to excellence. So who was the guy posting these just ridiculous stats? Well, Tyrus Raymond Cobb, or Ty Cobb, wasn't just a great player. He was known for being maybe the fiercest competitor the game has ever seen. And that incredible drive really shaped everything he did out on the field. To really get a handle on his dominance, we've got to look at what he did at the plate. I mean, he wasn't just a good hitter, he was a record-shattering force that completely redefined what was possible back in his day. He won an unbelievable 12 batting titles. Just think about that for a second. For 12 different seasons, he was the best hitter in the entire American League. It's a level of consistency and pure skill that almost nobody has ever come close to matching. And what's maybe even crazier is the streak inside that record. 9 of those 12 titles, he won them in a row. From 1907 to 1915, nobody else in the league stood a chance. This wasn't just him getting hot for a season or two. We're talking about almost a full decade of just total domination. That relentless consistency adds up, and boy, did it add up for Cobb. It led to this monumental total, 4,189 career hits. For decades, this was the all-time record, a mountain that seemed completely insurmountable until Pete Rose finally broke it. And even today, it's still one of the highest totals ever recorded. And his impact, it just lasted. He spent pretty much his whole legendary career with the Detroit Tigers, and his baseball mind was so respected that he even served as a player manager. So many of his records stood for over half a century, which just goes to show how far ahead of his time he really was. But here's the thing about Cobb. His game was so much more than just hitting. That legendary intensity he had was never more visible than when he got on base. He was an absolute force of nature on the base paths, using aggression and intimidation like weapons. He stole over 890 bases in his career, and that number was built on way more than just raw speed. It was about nerve, timing, and this unrelenting will to get an edge. He was famous for sliding with his spikes high, a tactic that absolutely terrified opposing players and really defined his aggressive style. So you can imagine, right? This win-at-all-costs attitude. It was a classic double-edged sword. It's what drove his success, and it earned him a ton of respect for his sheer talent and drive. But that exact same intensity made him a hugely controversial figure, alienating teammates and opponents. People respected his talent, for sure, but liking him? That was a different story. So where does all this leave us? Well, it all builds into one of the most complex legacies in sports history. How are we supposed to remember a player who was, at the same time, one of the greatest to ever play the game, and also one of its most difficult personalities? And you can really see the two sides of his reputation right here. On the one hand, his greatness was undeniable, a first-ballot Hall of Famer who actually got more votes than the legendary Babe Ruth. But on the other hand, the same fierce, aggressive play that made him great also made him deeply controversial and led to constant fights with his peers. And his status as a pioneer, it went beyond the baseball diamond. He was part of Major League Baseball's very first Hall of Fame class back in 1936, which really cemented his place among the immortals. And off the field, he was incredibly smart, becoming one of the first athlete millionaires through savvy investments in companies like Coca-Cola and General Motors. In the end, the whole story of Ty Cobb kind of leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? Is greatness defined just by the numbers, by the records, and by sheer dominance? Or does the respect, or, the lack of it, from the people you share the field with matter just as much? With Ty Cobb, the answer is just as complicated as the man himself.